Hi there, and welcome back to my channel on quilting and all things crafting. Today we're going to finish up the jelly roll quilt that we started a couple days ago, and I have decided, after a lot of debate back and forth in my head, I am not going to give it any more quilting. I'm happy with it just the way it is, and so I'm just going to let it stand as is. So now we need to put binding on. We're going to use this fabric for the binding, and it is currently 3 inches wide, and in order to use it we're going to need to make it 2.5 inches wide. And then we also need to figure out how much of it we need. Binding can be a challenge for some people. There is math involved, and I apologize if this gets tricky, but it's really not. If you just take your time, it's not too hard. So the first thing we do is we take our tape measure, and we measure how far across the quilt is. And in this case it is 30.5 inches. So we write down 30.5 inches. Then we measure from top to bottom. And that is 44 inches. Let me write that down. Now, the binding is going to go all the way around the quilt. It is going to be on all 4 sides. So we don't just have 30.5 and 44, we have 2 30.5s and 2 44s. So 30.5 plus 30.5, set that aside, otherwise I'm just going to sit here and putz with it. Can't have the tablet messed up, won't be able to do what I need to do. So 30.5 plus 30.5 is 61 inches. And 44 plus 44 is 88. 88 plus 61 gives us all the way around. So that's 9 and that's 14. So we need 149 inches of binding. That's the minimum we're going to need. And my extra fabric from our activities. These are the strips that I'm going to use to make the binding, and I have 5 of them. And when I lay them down and measure them, they are 21.25 inches long, folded in half. So that means they are 42.5 inches long total. Here's where we're going to start doing division. We have 149 inches that we need, and we have strips that are 42.5 inches long. So 42.5 goes into 149 how many times? And this is where you're going to have to try and remember your math or pull out your calculator, whichever makes you happy. And I'm going to do that. Hey Google, turn up the volume 60%.
All right.
Hey Google, what is 149 divided by 42.5?
Approximately 3.51.
So we're going to need at least 3.51 strips, which means we're going to need 4 in total, because we do want extra anyway. So I can take one of these strips and set it off to the side, and it can go in the stack with all the other stuff. And these I'm going to need to turn into 2.5 inch wide strips. Binding can be 2.5. Can go as low as 2.25. I prefer 2.5. I like to have that extra little wiggle room there. It's totally up to you as to how you want to do it, which way you want to go with that. Like I said, I prefer 2.5. It just makes me happy. All right, so since these were already cut once, and they are 3 inches wide, I am going to cut 1/4 of an inch off, or 1/2 inch off. would I do it on either side? That would be silly. All right, so I'm going to line up my lovely little ruler here so that I get 1, 2.5 inches. So I'm getting rid of a 1/4 inch off the side here, or a 1/2 inch. Goes in the stack and goes over here. Okay, and these have been folded up in a bin for so long that it's just not even worth messing with it. So the crease is very nice. If you don't have it already well creased, you're going to want to iron it and go through all that. But these are just fine the way they are. If you are doing it from fresh, brand new fabric and you're making your binding from fresh fabric, you can just use you don't have to cut off the salvage. Here, whoever made these strips has already cut off the salvage for me. They probably did it because, like I said, this was supposed to be a kit of some kind, and I assume this was supposed to be the border around whatever you made. And so it had that. You don't have to cut off the salvages. They're gonna get clipped off when we do the binding here in a minute anyway, so it doesn't really matter. All right, that side's more fuzzy, so I'm gonna go with that side. No, I don't like that. That's not lining up well. Let's look at this strip. Okay, this is a much better strip to use. That one's just not cut well. It was laying down, it was trying to weed it. Yeah, it doesn't work. All right, we have strips. Excellent. Get rid of the ruler, and don't need the pen or the paper here anymore. Oh, next project is sitting here. It's going to be a patriotic disappearing 9 patch. I posted a link on Facebook and on Twitter. And then of course it's posted on YouTube because that's where I'm streaming from right now. Still working on getting both YouTube and Facebook to stream at the same time. I know there's a way to do it, I just haven't gotten to it yet. This weekend will be spent straightening up this room and rearranging a little bit because after the past week of full filming and going full bore into this, I have discovered some different things. The table's been moved, that table's been bounced around a bit. Now I can't get into that whole corner of the room without tripping over wires. So this weekend is going to be spent rearranging and trying to get some things going on. We got a nice big dead corner here, so we're going to have to figure out what to do with that. I'm thinking my yarn shelf is coming over here, but I'm not certain. We're going to have to see. Okay, so we've got 4 pieces of fabric ready to go to be the binding. We need to trim down our quilt. We don't need all this extra fabric, the backing and the batting that's sitting here. So we're going to trim this down. And to do that, I need to get my junk or extra fabric out of the way. And we're going to come down here. And we're going to get a bigger ruler. Line everything up. Now remember, The center strips are 2 inches wide, so this end strip is going to be 2¼ inches wide. So that's what I'm going to line up at. I'm going to line 2¼ inches along the strip and then trim off the edge. Careful not to go over the board. Don't want to cut your table. On the next quilt, I'm going to try something that I haven't done. I was watching a binding video just to make sure I remembered how to do it, because it's been quite a while since I did binding. So before I did this for you, I wanted to make sure I remembered what I was doing. And she mentioned the fact that she put 1/4 inch extra of the batting and the backing in the binding. So instead of cutting it flush with the quilt like I am, she cut it 1/4 inch away from the edge of the quilt. And that, the way it looked when she showed it, it gave a little more oomph to the batting, or to the binding. I've never had that problem. I've never noticed it. So, but I think I'm going to try it on the next quilt, just because I want to see if it makes a difference or not. And since I know the quilting police are not going to come and take me away, I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead and try it next time. All right. Pulled it too far down. I wasn't able to get it on my table. There we go. 2¼ inches wide. There we go. Now, as you can probably imagine, doing this with a queen-size quilt or a full-size quilt or any bigger quilt, this can be a challenge. At that point, I would have pulled out, if I had something much bigger, I would pull out all my cutting boards and fill up this whole table pretty much with cutting boards, and I'd do it that way, and make sure there was nothing else on the table at the time. Because right now I've got phones and rulers and air diffuser, oil diffuser, whatever. I can't remember what it's called. I've got a bunch of stuff sitting on the end of the table. All right. You're going to think I'm weird. If you do quilt as you go and you do the miniature pieces, you can save this stuff. I don't. I'm not going to save it. I've saved stuff like this in the past, never used it. All it does is sit around in the storage areas and take up space, and we're not playing that game anymore. So I am throwing it away. Since it's cotton, it can go in the garbage without a problem. I have heard in the crafting world that there are issues with some yarns and fabrics because they have acrylics in them. And if the way I found this out was when I started crocheting, and people were asking what they did with the extra pieces of yarn that, you know, maybe an inch or two after you've stitched everything together and sewn it all up and everything else. And they're like, what do you do with these? Because you can't throw them in the garbage because they're acrylic. And I had never dawned on me. Obviously, just something I hadn't thought of. But I can say that my quilts are all cotton, so I have no qualms whatsoever with throwing any pieces or parts of it into the garbage can, because I know it is a natural product. It is not an acrylic product. Okay, so now we're going to do the top or the bottom, whichever. I'm lining up on the side I just cut and keeping it square. going to line up right along the seam that I was just doing. I've actually got another seam here for one of the little pieces right here, so I can make sure that that's 2 1/4 inches, and it is. So it's nice to have a way to double check. I want to be able to do that again because I have another 2 1/2 inch piece up there. Well, 2 1/4 now because it's been sewn in once. So straight, 2 1/4. Voila. Now I have 2 ways to check this time. Now I'm going to have the ability to check right angle to the piece side I cut and the 2 1/2 inches. The 2 1/4 inches. I keep saying 2 1/2. I don't know why. I wiggled a bit there, so I'm going to have to check that. All right. 2 1/4. Oh, I got a 2 inch square here. Excellent. 2 1/4 by 2 inches. Square that up, square down this end. Excellent. Oh, that's too far over. Okay. Let's do that. There we go. All right, that's what I need. I had 1/4 of an inch off. I was doing 2 1/2 again. Make sure it's straight and square. Excellent. Safety back on the rotary cutter so we don't fall and cut our toes. Oops, missed a little. There we go. Okay, we now have our quilt trimmed off. Just to continue looking at it in different ways, I'm going to hang it sideways. Because like I said, it's your quilt. There's no rhyme or reason as to which side is top, bottom, left, or right. All right, get some water. Let me check something. Let me check out in the hallway. hallway. In my loft, I need to check and see how things are coming on the video. All right, that seems to be, oh, excuse me, that seems to be fine. Now, there we go, we're back. Sorry about that. I had noticed a problem I was hearing things from out in the hallway, so I decided I had to go check on something. Not the hallway, the loft, my office, which is just outside the door. All right, 2.5 inches wide. Technology is not being my friend today. All right, now, binding. To get binding, to make binding, first of all, you can buy binding. It's not hard to find. I think I even have some. I say that, and of course now I can't find it. Oh, there it is. Double fold quilt binding. This one is, does it say how wide it is? 7/8 inch wide. So that's going to be something smaller. It says it's quilt binding, but I don't. I use it sometimes when I do placemats and things like that. Not quilted, just if I need something quick and easy. And there's got to be another reason I bought it. I have no idea what. I have all sorts of things. I don't know why I have them. Anyway, so you can buy it. It's something that can be purchased. But I like to have something that goes with the quilt in order to make it look right. So making it is not at all difficult. All we're going to do is take this and fold it in half and press it. Iron. Are you warm yet? No. It's been on for a little while. I have to remind it to do that. All right. I'm going to set this off to the side. And I am going to get this set up. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make sure it's flat. That way it can fold nicely. Then I'm going to, how can you see me? Yeah, okay. Fold it in half. And just go along. There are other people who will sew all of the strips together first and then press the big long strip, because we are going to have to go back and do that and repress just to make sure it's all fine and press the seams that we sew together, so on and so forth. So it's kind of like pressing twice. I just like to have straight, flat seams ready to go, and I don't have to think about which direction anything is. I'm just going to be able to match things up right away. This is especially helpful if you have a solid color fabric. Now, I happen to have a pattern fabric, so the front and the back are very evident. If you happen to have a fabric that's solid, like one of these, this is solid. There is not necessarily a right side and a wrong side. I mean, there is, but it just depends on how you look at it. That's going to be more challenging to match up later on. So you definitely want to press them first before you put them together. I'm actually going to move this all the way over to the sewing machine because that's where we're going next. So I'm just going to put it where it belongs. All right. Remember, we have 4 of these strips because we determined that's how much we were going to need to get all the way around the quilt. Oh, and don't forget, if you're enjoying yourself, go ahead and like and subscribe. Just getting started, so I'm still just feeling my way along. But this Jelly Roll quilt was a nice beginner. And then, like I said, the next quilt I'm going to do is a Disappearing 9 patch. And that's going to be fairly basic and to the point. I am going to be doing quilts from start to finish. So we're going to start with the fabric as it is, and then we're going to go from there. Right now I am using up the stuff I have in my stash, or I do belong to a club where they send me 2 fat quarters, or not 2 fat quarters, 2 charm packs every month. And the Patriotic Disappearing 9 patch, which is going to be my next quilt, is one of those charm packs that I received. I did purchase a Jelly Roll in red, white, and blue for my last project, which was a pillow cover for the month of July, because here in my world it is June, and so I had to work on making the cover for the month of July. In July I will do the one for August, and so on and so forth, because I found a book that I fell in love with that makes pillow covers for each month, and I thought they were really cute, and so I decided to do them, and I will do them along with you if you are so inclined. You can go to Annie's catalog and purchase the bench pillows for all seasons, and we can sew along together. But obviously I'm also doing my own quilts. That's the only thing I'll probably do other things from books at some point in time. And I will reference and put their information in the area below, in the comments, so that you know what I'm doing and where I'm getting it from. But most of what I plan to do is just going to be take what I have, put it together, and see how it comes out. I've got some, no, none of them are here. There must be over there. Some quilt block books that tell me, based on what I want to do, how I should cut the blocks, what size they need to be. And you can adjust the exact same block. They've got them in like 5, 6 different sizes. So the stuff I'm going to be doing is not going to be any major queen size, king size, full size quilts. I have one twin size quilt that I need to get done for my granddaughter, and once that is done, I am never making another big quilt again. I like these little ones. I just don't enjoy doing the big projects anymore. I just can't get into it. So I'm going to do little projects. I've got some purses I want to look at. I don't know about you, but I find purses to be fun and interesting. I've done bags before. I've never done an actual purse. I've done project bags for my knitting and my crocheting. I've done bags for grocery shopping, things like that. But I've never done a full-size, an actual official purse. And I even bought the little feet that go on the bottom, and I bought some decorations that go around the side, and I've got all sorts of little stuff for that. So I'm thinking that might be one of the projects we work on here. But I'm going to be quilting anyway, so I figured I might as well come on and let you quilt with me. Just seemed like the thing to do. All right, we're almost done with making pressing this binding. and then we're going to put it together. Yeah, we shouldn't be on today too long. I should have finished this yesterday, but I really just could not make up my mind whether I wanted to quilt this some more or not. I could not make up my mind, so that's why we did what we did. But okay, let's switch over to the sewing machine where we have our strips hanging off. And we still have our orange thread from quilting yesterday. And we still have our walking foot from quilting yesterday. And we still have our quilting needle. I am going to remove the foot and put the regular 1/4" piecing foot on. I am going to switch out from the colored thread back to my basic piecing thread. Excuse me. And but I am going to leave this needle on. I could switch it out and put it. Well, I did save this needle from yesterday. Yeah. I'll switch it out, and then we'll switch it back when we put the backing or the binding on the quilt. All right, screwdriver. Now let's take the thread out first. That was a lot of twisting. I'm going to be very mad at myself when I try and use this color again. All right, set that off to the side. Get this foot off of here. There we go. Didn't want to set in there correctly. Okay. Change out the needle. Not all brands do this, but I know my quilting needle because it's got the green on it. There is the size and everything on the needle. Even when I was younger and didn't have to wear glasses, I could not read that number on that needle. So I just make sure I have everything in a box or labeled before I mess with it. Since I knew I was going to use this needle to finish up the binding, that's why I saved it yesterday, I knew exactly what needle it was. If I didn't know what size needle it was, I would have tossed it. Come on. No twisting today. There we go. Okay, so normally I would drop my stitch length down to 1.5, and I would move my needle over one to the right because I don't do 1/4 inch seams very well. We're not actually doing a 1/4 inch seam right now, so it doesn't really matter. Therefore I'm not going to move the needle right now. Later on, when I am doing the binding to the quilt, I will drop it down. But right now I won't. All right, so what we're going to do now is we are going to go from outside to outside. This is why I said if this is salvaged, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to hurt anything. If in error you go from the inside of the V to the outside of the V, so you go this way, that's not going to work for binding. It's going to be all wonky. It's not going to be right. You want to go from the outside to the outside, so straight across. If you are so inclined, you are welcome to put a line down so that you have a straight line to follow. I am not going to do that. I don't need to be that specific. I am just not that much of a perfectionist, so I'm not going to worry about it. I need a piece of fabric, though. Don't I have any little ones left? No, everything is bigger. All right, well, I'm going to take this one. Because just like when we were piecing, we need feeder fabric. And I did look it up. It is because you want the stitch to go all the way across. Because normally, if you're sewing, you're going to start in a little bit. And we need the seam to be all the way across. So that's why we use feeder fabric. I mentioned yesterday I thought that was what it was, but I couldn't remember. I knew I'd heard it somewhere, but I couldn't remember. I looked it up. Sure enough, that is it. The reason that we as quilters do that is so that we get the seam all the way across. All right, so we're going to go like that. And now we're going to go at an angle straight across. And needle down, because I like needle down. Now we're going to do the next one. So I brought around the edge, this piece here, I brought it around, right side up. Next piece, right side down, tail off to the side. Outside edge to outside edge, remember that. Okay, bring the end around, and our last strip. Make sure it stays flat. Alright, back over to the table here. And now we need to get rid of the excess and trim our seams up. Alright, so clip, clip, and clip. All right, next part. We need these. We need to get rid of the extra fabric here. You want to do a 1/4 inch seam, just like everywhere else. And if you would like, you may set it down Get your little ruler. Hey, kitty cat. Measure 1/4 of an inch. And cut the fabric. If you want to do that, you are more than welcome to do that. That gives you an exact 1/4 of an inch. We're going to get rid of the tails in a few minutes. That's perfectly an acceptable option. The other option is to take your pair of scissors and guesstimate 1/4 of an inch following your seam. Whichever option makes you happy makes me happy. You don't want to leave a ton of fabric in there. You want to make sure you get it to the 1/4 of an inch, and whichever method gets you there and makes you comfortable, go for it. All right, that's closed up. That is closed up. I still have a kitty cat at my feet loving me. That's such a pretty girl. Water. And now this is where I said we're going to be pressing again. And that's why some people say, why do you bother pressing to begin with? It just makes me happy. Honestly, it just makes me happy. All right. Press. Again, just to make sure you're nice and closed. I have, depending upon the type of how the fabric is responding to me, I have at points in time used my best press with the binding. Typically I don't. It doesn't bother me that much, but I have had instances where the fabric is fighting with me. I am going to use the best press at the seam though, so it will be used. I don't see that it's terribly necessary all the way down. So all along we have been pressing our seams to one side or the other. Now we are going to press our seams flat, each side. The reason is we want the least amount of bulk as possible in our seams. That's also why we do it at an angle, because if we had done it straight on, when we rolled this seam later on, you'd have the seams all the way across. It'd be big and bulky. With it being at an angle like it is, it's going to lay much nicer, and it's just going to look better. So I hand pressed. Hey, big girl. And now I will press, press. And then we will go back to our folding. And now when we look at the binding, there's a seam going this way and a seam going this way, and it's not going to be all on top of each other. It's going to be spaced out so that we don't get this big lump of fabric. What you doing to her? She is now attempting to eat my fabric that's hanging down. All right, big girl, let me put it on the table. There we go. Let's put it over there. That way you don't get claw marks in it. All right, now we've got another seam. This was one of them I cut with the scissors. It's a little narrow for 1/4 of an inch, but narrow isn't going to hurt anything. All right, finger press. Where's my best? There it is. also going to need to fill this up over the weekend. Okay. Got that pressed that way. Now we go back to this. Okay, so now we've got our last seam to press out. Come on. Keep moving it around, I'm never going to find it. Put it back there where it belongs. All right. Press. All right. So now we have our binding. If you want to make your binding in advance, you're welcome to do that, and then you can store it on your ruler. Put it around your ruler. I make it as I go. I make binding when I need it. I don't make binding in advance. So, as an example, on the patriotic quilt I'm going to do next, I am going to do a strip of red, a strip of white, and a strip of blue, all sewn together for the binding. So there will be 3 different colors of binding. In this case, I'm using the exact same color all the way around, keeping it there. That's perfectly fine. You can do it either way. Now to start the binding, oh, sorry. And the reason some people might want to make their binding in advance is they would switch back to their walking foot right now to do their binding. I am going back and forth on that one. I think I will switch back to the binding, to the walking foot, and so making the binding first before you quilt it, and then once you quilt it, that way you can go directly from quilting to binding without switching out feet and all that good stuff. It's up to you. For me, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not in a major rush. I am doing this for fun. This is something that, just I do for myself and my sanity. If I was doing this professionally and I was worried about time and things like that, yeah, I can understand why you would switch it out, why you would make the binding first. I don't see that it's a big deal. I have also put on binding without switching to the walking foot. I think I will this time, I don't think I will. I think I'm going to leave it just the way it is. So let's go to the machine. All right. So now we're going to find a spot somewhere in the middle of a side. Doesn't matter where, doesn't make any difference. I am going to go back and increase my stitch length to a standard stitch length. I'm not going up to the quilting, which I use a 4.0. I'm going to leave it at a standard stitch length. For my machine, that happens to be 3.0. But I'm just going to leave it as standard stitch length. Then I am going to make sure I have a tail of binding hanging off the side, or hanging that doesn't get stitched down, because I don't want it all stitched down. We will see why later. And then I am going to do the what my machine calls it a fix. I am going to do that here because I want to make sure that I get a tight seam. Now, just like when we were quilting, you've got to make sure that the quilt stays out of the way, is somewhat level. That way it can feed through correctly, because your feed dogs are what are pulling the fabric. You are not pushing or pulling the fabric through. Take your time, keep things straight and even. Oops, things are flopping around over here. Your binding might try and scooch, technical term, might try and move over a little bit. You want to try and keep it straight and even right along the seam, or right along the edge. I'm sure someone out there is going, well, that's why you use the walking foot. I agree. The binding moving is kind of annoying, and it is because I'm not using my walking foot. I do agree with that statement. Well, and the other thing I forgot to do was switch back over to my quilting needle. I'm using a standard needle here, so it doesn't have an eye quite as big as the quilting needle, but it seems to be stitching fine. I'm not seeing any jumped stitches or anything like that, so I'm okay. I'm happy with it so far. Oh, let me show you something while I'm thinking about it, because this will come in handy in just a few minutes here. All right, I have this little measuring guide that does all sorts of different measurements, and one of them happens to be 1/4 of an inch. If you look where the needle is, you will see that 1/4 of an inch and you may or may not be able to see this very well on the camera, but 1/4 of an inch is where the foot ends. Not the feet that stick out, but the base of the foot is 1/4 of an inch. So therefore, I'm coming up to the corner here. I want to stop 1/4 of an inch from the edge. The way I'm going to know that I've done that is because the edge of the fabric will be on the edge, or those red lines, the little red lines that are on the feet that stick out. I guess you call them toes, I would guess, because we call them feet and this is an ankle, so these little things must be toes. If I'm going to continue the thought process there. So to get to 1/4 of an inch from the edge, we want to make sure we get to 1/4 of an inch from the edge. Alright, so that's where we're at. We're at 1/4 of an inch from the edge. I am now going to go back a couple of stitches. I am then going to go forward a couple of stitches. That locks my thread in. That means I'm going to have a really tight seam there. Now I am going to turn. I'm going to stitch off of the quilt. Alright, so I'm done. Now I need to go up and down. So to get a miter seam, I need the fabric to go down so the top is folded over and right aligned with the edge of the fabric, and there's a fold in there. We're now going to turn, and we are going to go back and stitch on this side, or not go back. We're going to go now. We're going to go and we're going to stitch on this side. And I messed up. I got my thread caught on the foot. I am classic for doing this, so that's why I know I did it. You always have to make sure your thread goes underneath the foot before you start sewing, and I thought I did it. It snuck in there on me. Alright, so now we're turning the fabric and turning the quilt, and getting everything lined back up again. And there we go. And now we're off. Okay, let's get this straightened around a little bit so I have it more even. There we go. I'm hearing chewing. I'll be right back. Oh, it's okay. There's somebody out here, though. That's what I'm seeing. I'm hearing things. All right. Sorry about that. I thought there was a cat chewing on something. It turns out it's just somebody playing with the computer. Coming up on a corner, so we're going to be prepared to make our turn. Almost there. That's our edge. Excellent. Back a couple of stitches. Forward a couple of stitches. Turn. And exit. Okay. Get it folded down, get it more straight. There we go. Nope, that's not quite straight. Why is that sticking up? I can't fold. Nope, that's still not coming up straight. Let's see here. There we go, straight across. Make sure the thread stays under the foot this time. Up to the foot. Up to the needle, under the foot, and we start sewing again. There we go. Much better corner. I did mention earlier it's been a while since I've done binding, so I have to remember all the little tips and tricks to get it on there straight. All right, the wrinkling of the binding is because I'm not using the walking foot, just so you know. So that is causing me to go slower than I normally would. I have to stop and straighten it every so often. coming up on our last, well, no, we've got still one. Our third corner. Okay, back up a couple. Turn the quilt. Stitch off the machine. There we go. Come around. Fold under, fold over. There we go. Use the tools you have and things go easier. Make sure thread is underneath presser foot. It is. Get quilt up to needle. Excellent. And go. Come on. There's the thread tried to sneak in again. Sneak it on top of the foot. All right. Get a little ways in and straighten out the fabric again. And off we go. Okay, caught. It's causing us to pull. We don't want to do that. Keep everything straight. There we go. Quilt was caught on the edge of the table and it was trying to pull it, so there's a spot here where it almost went off the fabric. But it didn't quite make it that far, so we're good. We were able to recover. Last corner. There we go. Now it's the last corner. Thought the last one was, but I was wrong. All right. 1, 2. 1, 2. Turn the fabric. Turn the quilt. Go off the edge. Back. thread's trying to sneak over that toe again. Make sure it's all underneath the foot. And get it all straight in there. And so. Get it all straightened around. So we're facing the right direction. There we go. All right. And go. All right, where am I sewing to? That's what I'm sewing to. Okay. I am going to put a stop in the fabric or in the thread. Trim this down. Now, something I messed up on, and I noticed as I was doing it that I forgot, and it's not too late to fix that, is I forgot to cut off the little wings. They're tiny, but they do put extra fabric in your binding, and so it'll stick out. It'll look odd. So you want to make sure that those were cut off. I should have done it while I was pressing the binding, but I forgot and wasn't paying attention. Actually, they're not that bad on some of them. Oh, that's right. These couple I did really, instead of 1/4 of an inch, though, they're not going to stick up too much. All right. So now, here is the fun part. So now, in order to get these to join up, you need them to overlap by 2.5 inches. The reason they have to match up by 2.5 inches is because my binding width is 2.5 inches. So whatever your binding width is how much these are going to overlap. Because after you do that, you're going to do another angled seam. And I forgot to grab a ruler to sit over here with me. So this fabric goes on the bottom. This fabric goes on the top, just because this one's longer. And from where the bottom fabric starts, right here, I want to measure 2.5 inches in. And that's where I'm going to cut the top fabric off at. 2.5 inches. Does that have to be absolutely exact? No. I've seen other people do it just eyeballing it. I still like to measure it because it just makes me more comfortable, but totally up to you. Now comes one of the most annoying steps, in my opinion. Because you gotta bunch up your quilt, fold it over, and get things all squished together. Because now we are going to do the exact same seam we did before. We've got our handy little V going here. Looks like there we go. Don't leave too much on either side. I'm going to drop my stitch length. And it really wants to bunch up, so you have to be very, very careful here to try and keep it as flat and straight as possible. Feeder fabric. It wants to bunch, so you have to be careful. Keep it flat. Part you're sewing on, keep it flat, keep it straight. Okay, now we're going to cut off our feeder fabric. We're going to cut off our 1/4 of an inch from the seam. Get rid of any extra threads that are sitting around. Fold the fabric, finger press, make sure it's tight. Cut off our little wings. All right. And now we finish this portion of it. So again, I am going to do the fix on the stitch so that I get a nice, the seam, sets the stitch length back. Don't need that tiny little stitch length here. When you get to the end, okay, let's go over to the overview and let's look at this. Okay, so now we are like 99% done. And you're going to hear differing opinions. And again, we go back to it's your quilt, do whatever you want. Because I put the binding onto the front of the quilt. And now it gets twisted around and over around the seam to the back side of the quilt. And there will be many people that will tell you that when you do it this way, you now need to get a hand needle and sit down with your quilt in your lap and hand sew the binding to the back of the quilt. There are people that say that if you want to use your machine to put the binding on your quilt, that's okay. Isn't that nice of them to say it's okay? Thank you. Glad you let me do what I want. But you should put your binding on the back of the quilt and fold it around to the front and then sew on the front. I don't like the way that looks. I don't like the way it looks. I think then you've got this flap of fold sitting on the front of the quilt, and I don't like it. It's personally my preference that you shouldn't do that. Again, but it's your quilt. You're welcome to do that. I, on the other hand, prefer, I'm not going to hand stitch, just so you know. I prefer to clip it up, and it's going over the seam that's on the back. There's a seam here where I stitched, and that seam is this seam right here between these two fabrics. So I am going to put on an open toe foot, and I am going to stitch in the ditch along here. I have a walking foot that has interchangeable feet, and it has a stitch in the ditch foot. And there are feet like that where it's got a guide right down the middle. And depending upon my mood, when I get over there, I could change my mind and use one of those. I'm not going to put the walking foot back on. I'm just not really in the mood to listen to that thing go clunk, clunk, clunk as I go along. But I may pull one of the guide feet out that allows me to stitch straight down the center. As long as when you're clipping it, you make sure that your binding is coming over the back and covering that seam, that stitched line, you're not going to see, or you're going to get, your binding is going to be sealed with the stitching that we're going to do. You can use pins. I don't know if this was the actual purpose of these clips or not. I think it probably was, because they are absolutely phenomenal for that. I use them every so often. You've seen me, if you've been watching me for a while, you've seen me use them instead of pins to hold together a couple pieces of fabric. I used them as guide marks when I was putting the strips together, so I knew which side to stitch the seam in. Or which two sides of the strips to put together, I should say. So they are great, but they are absolutely perfect for this. They are, I swear they are designed specifically for this. They've got just the right amount of give in them, so go for it. Use the clips. If you don't have the clips, use some pins. Whatever you've got, make it happen. To make it happen is totally your call. Corners, just make sure you poke them out, and then you fold them down so you get a nice miter. And then I always, yeah, there we go. I clip from the miter side. That way I know where it is. Probably should have done the miter the other way, because I'm going to be sewing. Yeah, I should. There we go. Because we're going to be sewing that way. Yes. So the miter goes with, the folded part of the miter goes with the flow of what the direction I'm going to be sewing in. That way you don't take a chance that it bounces around at all. Water. Water is good. How are we doing temperature-wise? Oh, we're up to 76. We were at 75. I was feeling good, thinking we weren't going to make it to 77 in here today, but we're going up. It's only 86 outside, so it's surprising. I would think it would be cooler in here, but it's not. Come on. And again, if you've been watching me for a while, it's probably one of the first times you've seen me do anything like this. Usually I don't pin things and I don't clip things. I don't mess with it. You do want to make sure that this is going to cover up your seam all the way around before you get going. And I don't know if you noticed this on the last corner, but I always do one side, then the other side, and then I do the corner. It just tends to make the corner easier to identify and to get it to agree with doing what you want it to do. You want to fold it over and then miter. Why are we being challenging? Did I go too far on that one? It's a little wonky, but not too bad. All right, we're getting there. We're on the third side now. Oh, last side. Last corner. All right. We are set. Let's get over to the sewing machine. And let's think about this. Don't know why that all fell down. Stuff on the ground. I must have got it caught with the quilt when I was working on it before. Now I'm losing my microphone. There we go. That's better. Need to see. I do. I do. Yes. Move this over here so I don't lose it for when I get done in a minute. Okay. So, presser foot that has the guide down the middle. Let's look here. I believe it is in this one because I believe I put all of the quilting feet in this one. If you were with me the other day when I was trying to find a button foot, you probably laugh hysterically at me because I just could not figure out where it went. All right, and that is the walking foot. Do I have just a regular foot? It has a guide down the middle. I know I do, it's just a matter of where. Stitch in the ditch foot. There it is. Okay. Put that on the floor for now. I'll worry about that later. And then I will pull this out. I am going to go ahead and just leave the thread I have on here. Well, it should blend in nicely, but let's see. I'm going to use a different, this is an off-white. Well, I guess most of that is off-white. I don't know if you were with me the other day when I found out that I had a pink thread. I think I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the pink. I'm going to switch over to the quilting needle. Like I should have when I was doing the binding, but forgot. So they make invisible thread. It's a nylon, and you can use that if you'd like to hide your stitches so that none of this that I'm going to do now would show at all. But since I know I have this pink thread that I found, and there's this light pink is in the binding anyway, I'm going to go ahead and use this pink as the thread for this stitching. And this is 50 weight, 100% cotton, so it is cotton yarn, or thread. I need a bobbin. And you can use different colors as long as it's the same weight of thread. So my piecing thread that I use here, this is 60 weight, so it's thinner than this, which is 50 weight. The bigger the number, the thinner the thread. There we go. So I could use this pink on top and use a purple on the bottom, or a red. Depending upon how well calibrated your machine is, you won't see the top thread on the bottom and you won't see the bottom thread on the top. That didn't work. I love this table, but it gets in the way when I change out my bobbin. It drives me crazy. opening? Where is the opening? All right, well, just make sure it's behind there. So you can start anywhere you want. And I am going to be stitching from the top, from the front of the quilt to the back of the quilt. Like I said, I'm okay with it. I'm going to be stitching in the ditch, so I'm perfectly fine with doing that. You will, if you quilt with other people at any point in time and they see you do this, there could be someone that says something to you about it. I apologize. For me it works, for you it may not. I am going to fix and stop my stitches so that way I get a nice start and a nice finish. I also left my stitch length at 3.0. I didn't bother raising it up to 4.0, which is what you would use for standard quilting. Just because I do want the binding to be well attached. So here we go. We've got our binding in the back. You can see where I started and stopped. It does get a little wonky there. And my stitches are going along in the ditch. So in the seam that we stitched to put the binding on. Alright, so now you do have to be very careful on the corners because the mitered part that we folded so nicely when we did this always wants to come apart. At least it does for me. So we're going to be very careful and take our time. And also this presser foot, this little part here, is going to get in the way as we try and get over the corner, so you have to be very careful. Alright, got through that part of it. Now we turn. Oh, and just like the other presser foot where these, what am I calling it? I call them toes. Where these stick out. This ending part over here is where 1/4 of an inch is. So I stitched until the binding got to that, and so I was able to make a perfect turn. I'm not feeling comfortable that that's going to stay where it's supposed to, so I'm going to put a clip back in there. No, that's right. Okay, here we go. It is, okay. Just looked like it was bubbling more than it was catching, but I guess we're fine. Because you do want to make sure as you're doing this that you are catching the thread in the back. Or not the thread, the binding in the back. Getting really close to the edge there, so now I'm getting a little uncomfortable, but let's no, see, that's what happens. I missed it. All right, so I'm going to stop. Cut the thread. Okay, now I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to that down a little bit more. Cut, went back and caught it again, but I could tell it was sticking out too far. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here, turn on my fix so that I seal the seam, or seal the stitch, and stitch it again. All right, let's look. Okay, there we go. Yes, it is now in there. on? Yep, we're still doing good. All right, excellent. Still doing it. See, now I'm paranoid. Did it once, now I'm going to sit here every 5 stitches and check. Make sure that it doesn't mess it up again. I can tell the binding is the right size, so as far as the width, so I know it's okay. It's just, now I'm going to be paranoid. Oops. Don't go too fast. I wasn't paying attention. I got a little off the stitch in the ditch area. Right. Coming up on the corner here. Now, I don't know if you can see it with the thing. I need to iron this again because some of the pen mark is still there where I marked my lines earlier. We do. Okay. Yeah, we're good. Got a little carried away there. I needed to slow down sooner. All right, let's get this. Shouldn't need that anymore. Let's turn the quilt. I feel like I'm constantly turning the quilt. Moving the quilt, pressing the quilt. Alrighty. Let's trim the back threads. There we go. Oops. Threads in my pin box. Alright. Over to here. Let's look. Alright. So we have almost everything done. There's one last thing to do. Always, always, always put a label on your handiwork. You never know where it might end up, how far down the road it might be when somebody pulls this out and looks at it and says, oh, wonder where that came from. So you always do that. You can put the label in any corner you want. I happen to get these linen woven something. There was a place I got them made. In the past, I've embroidered my own. I've done a lot of different things. I just decided to be lazy and get these and not worry about having to do it. The worst part about the label is the fact that you do have to hand stitch it in. The reason you have to hand stitch is because if you were to use the machine stitch, it would go through and then you would have a rectangle on the other side of your fabric. And we don't want that. That's not going to work. So, hand needle. Not. Didn't make the knot big enough. Which means I have too big a needle, but that's beside the point. And I missed. Let's do one more. See if I can get this to work this time. There we go. Now remember, when you're doing this, don't go through all the layers of the fabric. Otherwise you will get the same thing you would get if you did a machine stitch, which is you'll get a rectangle on the good side of your quilt, which you do not want. That's not going to work either. Now I just cut the knot off. Yes, I did. After all that work I went through to get the knot in. This is why I hate hand sewing. I'll be here for an hour. Let's see, we've gone for 2 hours and 15 minutes today, and it's probably going to take me another hour just to get this stupid label on. Alright, there's that. Hide that underneath. Oh, and I'm using the orange cotton thread that I used to do the quilting to attach this. So for consistency's sake, I wanted to use the same color thread. You can use whatever color you want. You can, I believe they sell these that are iron-on. I feel like I've seen that somewhere before. I'm just whip stitching it on so that it is attached to the back without being too big. And I can guarantee you this label is the one thing that will not last on this quilt. Not that the label won't last, but that if anything were to fall apart on this quilt, it's going to be the fact that the label falls off before anything else. I had the same problem with one of my granddaughter's quilts. The label kept falling off. And I'm like, just take the label off. It's okay. You know who made it. It's not a big deal. But they kept wanting to put it back on. I'm like, all right, well, we'll put it back on. Alright, let's switch to the other side. Yeah, I don't know if I like this label. I think I'm going to get a different style for the next batch. They're not bad, but they're kind of small. Well, sorry, small isn't the problem. There's not a lot of room between the words and the edges of the piece to be able to whip stitch. And it looks weird with the color thread because the orange thread and the green writing don't necessarily go together. But green thread wouldn't have gone with the quilt, so it would have looked weird there. So, a couple different issues going on, and I'm not certain how I'm going to solve, but I will have to do that. All right. And bingo! We have a completed quilt. So if you have watched all 3 sections of this, you have seen me take strips of fabric that were pre-cut to 2.5 inches and put them together, and we have a finished quilt. Alrighty, so we're at 2 hours and 19 minutes. There we go. So not too bad. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you're so inclined and you want to stitch along with me next time, I'm going to be making a disappearing 9 patch. You'll need a 5-inch charm pack. So 5-inch squares. If you'd rather cut your own fabric, just cut 5 inches square. Make sure you have 36 of them. All the charm packs I have are 42 squares, so I believe that's standard. I do not know. You are going to need 36 5-inch squares, and then I'm using red, white, and blue fabric that was left over from a jelly roll that I had done for a project a little while ago. And I'm going to use those strips somehow. I'm not certain if they're just going to be a border, if they're just going to be the binding, if they're going to go between squares. I honestly don't know at this point. I haven't completely designed it all. All I did was go through and make sure I had things that matched that would go in the disappearing 9 patch. So that's where we stand there. I'm not using, these are colors that I still have also from the jelly roll. These I'm not using because they don't blend with the colors that are in the charm pack. I've got a basic white, it looks like muslin probably of some kind, that I have. I'm not certain how white it is or anything like that, but I just have a basic white. That's what I'm going to use for my backing. And then the batting that I attempted to use in this quilt but turned out I didn't have enough of, we're going to use that. I don't know if I'm going to do the 4 squares lengthwise and make a table runner, or if I'm going to do them in a square and make a square. I know that the blocks themselves should end up being about 13 inches square when I'm done with them. So the quilt, the piece top without any borders, is it going to be a 26 by 26, or it would be 52 by 13 if I do it lengthwise. So one of those things are going to happen. I don't know. I let the fabric tell me what to do. I just go with the flow and decide what I'm going to do as I do it. It's been a pleasure seeing you or visiting with you on this particular quilt, and hopefully we'll see you on the next one. This is Carol the Crafty Grandma, and I'm headed out for the day. You folks have a wonderful day. Bye.